On a tiny remote island in the Pacific Ocean, a wild and ragged man stumbles ashore. Then, as rescuers subsequently cluster around him, it's clear that he's been at sea for a very long time. However, as Jose Salvatore Alvarenga's story begins to unfold, few can believe the epic journey that's taken him some 6,700 miles from home. On November 17, 2012, Jose Alvarenga was preparing to leave the village of Costa Azul in Chiapas, Mexico for a fishing trip. Usually his friend Ray Perez went with him on such expeditions, but that day Perez was unable to make it. Instead, then, Alvarenga asked a 22-year-old local soccer player, Ezequiel Cordoba, to go in Perez's place. Cordoba and Alvarenga had never chatted, let alone worked together prior to then, but the fisherman promised him $50 and Cordoba agreed. So together the pair left Costa Azul aboard Alvarenga's 25-foot fishing boat, and for the next 30 hours they planned to fish for sharks, sailfish, and marlins in the deep ocean. Alvarenga's boat was low and open, without any raised structure or working electricity, and although the vessel contained plenty of essentials such as gasoline, fishing line, and a cell phone, the GPS wasn't protected from water and the two-way radio was only partially charged. At first, in any case, the trip seemed to go well. Together, the pair managed to catch more than 1,000 pounds of fish, including sought-after tuna, sharks, and mahi-mahi. However, later that day, they were hit by a storm and blown off their intended course. As massive waves continued to batter the tiny boat, the inexperienced Cordoba reportedly began to panic. Finally, though, there was a lull in the storm, and Alvarenga sighted land. So then there was another dire misfortune at hand. The struggling motor sputtered and died. So grabbing the radio, Alvarenga sent an SOS message to Willie, his boss. Immediately, Willie requested coordinates for Alvarenga and Cordoba's location. However, the GPS was no longer working, and the fishermen were unable to identify their position. Willie therefore ordered them to lay anchor, but Alvarenga had neglected to bring one on the trip. Still undaunted, Willie reassured the two men that help was on its way. And after receiving a report of the missing boat, Chiapas authorities launched a search and rescue mission. Yet, according to official Jamie Marroquin, poor visibility meant that they were forced to cancel search flights after just 48 hours. As days and then weeks passed with no sign of Alvarenga or Cordoba, the chances of the two men being found alive grew ever more remote. Meanwhile, in the fishing community of Costa Azul, life slowly returned to relative normality. And yet then, some 14 months after the pair had first set sail from Mexico, a couple living on a remote atoll in the Marshall Islands made a startling discovery. Amy Libok Mito and her husband Russell Lycadrique live on Tile Islet, one of 22 small islands that make up the Pacific Ocean's Iban Atoll. Normally, the couple's days are spent stripping the husks from coconuts and drying them outside their island home. However, on January 30th, 2014, their routine was broken by the arrival of a mysterious stranger. As I'm looking across, I see this white man there, Libok Mito recounted to Jonathan Franklin for the journalist's 2015 book, 438 Days. He's yelling. He looks weak and hungry. My first thought was that this person swam here. He must have fallen off a ship. Then, after taking the man into their home, Lycadrique sailed to a nearby town for help. A nurse and a policeman then arrived and brought the wild-looking man back to the main port of Iban. And slowly, the man was able to relate the details of how he'd come to be washed up on Tile Islet. Journalists and researchers subsequently started to suspect that he was Alvarenga, and that he had sailed some 6,700 miles across the Pacific Ocean. But had Alvarenga really survived at sea for 438 days? And what had been the fate of Cordoba, his unfortunate crewmate? At first, the fisherman was unwilling to open up to the press, but over time, reporters and investigators began to piece the story together. After losing radio contact with his boss in Costa Azul, Alvarenga had realized that he and Cordoba were on their own. Then, for days, the storm had continued to batter the tiny boat. And in order to make the vessel more stable, the pair apparently had to dump their valuable catch overboard. At night, it's reported the two men had huddled inside a large, upside-down icebox for warmth, while by day, Alvarenga had apparently caught fish with his bare hands. In fact, he later claimed that his severe dehydration saw him resort to drinking his own urine in order to survive. Then, after around 2 weeks at sea, it started to rain, blessing the pair with much-needed drinking water. Gradually, the weeks turned into months. and still no sign of rescue arrived. It's said the pair therefore survived by scavenging garbage bags from the ocean, and through Alvarenga's growing ability to capture turtles and birds. Cordoba, however, apparently began to decline both mentally and physically. Indeed, it seems that after some 4 months at sea, Cordoba passed away. For 6 days, Alvarenga apparently continued to talk with his crewmate's corpse, treating him as if he were alive. Then he reportedly buried his friend in the ocean, terrified at the prospect of continuing his ordeal alone. For the next 10 months, Alvarenga drifted with only his imagination for company, and he said that although he considered killing himself, his religious faith would not allow him to do so. Instead, he apparently disappeared into a rich fantasy world in which he took walks around the world, enjoyed good food, and met with a variety of lovers. Then at last Alvarenga spotted land. Amazed, he slashed away the buoys that had been keeping the boat stable on the ocean and guided it towards Tide Islet. And there he stumbled into Emmy and Russell's island home and walked into history books. After camera crews then descended on Iban and started snapping pictures of the heavily bearded castaway, his image quickly went viral. Today, Alvarenga lives with his family in El Salvador, his ordeal having mended a rift that saw them estranged for each other for 8 years. Cordoba's family, meanwhile, seemingly took a contentious approach to dealing with their loss. Apparently, after Franklin's 438 Days was released, the dead man's relatives tried to sue Alvarenga, suggesting that he'd cannibalized Cordoba in order to survive. Alvarenga, however, denied these claims.